This video is about how and why I used the Kawa model in my student research. My name is Clarissa Sawley and I'm an occupational therapist living in London, where I work for an eating disorder service. My passport says that I'm Norwegian, but I grew up in South Africa and I now consider England my home. I'm what the literature would call an adult third culture kid. A third culture kid is a child who moves to another culture with their parents due to their parents' career choice. I understand that the Japanese have different words for third culture kids depending on whether they're living abroad with their parents or returning to Japan. The third culture kid literature is very psychological in nature. It covers topics like identity development, psychological well-being and unresolved grief. And while these are very important topics, as a student of occupational therapy as well as an adult third culture kid, I thought a lot about an occupational perspective of the third culture kid experience and the effect that relocation has on daily life. And while I was trying to figure out what type of methodology to use in my student research, I came across this article by Zilba, and she concluded that people often use metaphors when talking about the third culture kid experience because it helps us to communicate something that'd be quite difficult to do otherwise. And while I was reading this article, I suddenly thought, why not use the Kawa model? Another article, this time by Corinne Sears, looked at the importance of narrative for third culture kids, and she interviewed students, their parents and teachers at international school. And a theme that came out very strongly was that people described third culture kids' lives in chronological order, talking about all the moves that had happened. And she used an example of this where she interviewed an 11-year-old boy and she asked him to tell her about himself. And he started right at the beginning of his story with, "I was born in Geneva." And reading this article, I thought more and more about the Kawa model and how the longitudinal river especially would be quite important to use. So how did I use the Kawa model in my research? The first way was to help me to reflect. And as an insider, it was very important to enhance my trustworthiness and credibility. And so I spent time completing my own Kawa, and I found it was actually quite difficult to remember the whole life story in one go. And so what I did was I looked at the different chunks, the different cross-sections of my life, going back to what Sears said, and then piecing them together into a longitudinal river. And this process really helped me to make sense of what I was bringing to the research. Secondly, using the Kawa model helped me to understand my participants' life story. I interviewed an occupational therapy student who had had several relocations during her developmental years. And what the Kawa did was it helped me to keep track of the chronology of her story. And so we could jump back and forth between different places in the river, and I could be free to listen to what she was saying rather than trying to remember the sequence of events. The river metaphor also opened up a whole new level of communication for us, where she used images to convey meanings, like piranhas in her river, or waterfalls, or singing fish, and even the shape of her river communicated something to me. So in conclusion, the Kawa model provided a really useful framework for me during the research process, both in supporting me to reflect and in enhancing the communication during the interview. If you'd like to find out more about third culture kids, then check out the link to my blog, which is on the slide. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to this short presentation.
Created using PowToon.